in this episode today, we're gonna talk to Gabe Saga, who generated over $15 million with a YouTube channel, got it over 4.5 million subscribers. And the beautiful thing here is that he's behind the scenes. He was even retired, so we're gonna uncover some truths that nobody's talking about online. And the other thing is you cannot find him anywhere else, because I had to almost pay him to get him on this podcast episode. I bribed him with the most amazing podcast studio where even Wes Watson and a bunch of crazy influencers are doing their podcasts. So let's get into it. Nowadays, it's really interesting because short form is really, becoming a thing. It's like almost like the thing. I mean, would you say it's the thing at the moment?
I would say short form definitely is a way to utilize your content and spread it to a lot of different audiences that may have not essentially watched longer form content. And I think it plays a role. I would pay closer attention to what you really want your brand to be. So what I would see is that a lot of short form and people who do short form very well, sometimes how well you control the brand depends on how that brand and your association and how people think of you eventually ends up being the mindset of someone who watches you. So for example, you have people, let's say like Andrew Tate, like he did it in a very, I'm going to show you how to edit. And then he unfortunately got a lot of clips edited out of context for him. Now there is the virality to that, but then there's also the brand associated with it.
Yeah. You said something interesting there, right? It's like, it's how people get to know your brand. We were also just talking here before we started the podcast. And then you see that this is not my info. I'm just repeating what I just heard. That the big brands, they really think about like in their podcast, hey, what kind of clip can we cut out of this so that people actually start watching the podcast. So it's kind of getting to the point where this is maybe it's not as important because they both have a different role, right?
Yep.
Like the long form is more for nurturing, I guess, and the short form is more for actually getting to know you. But it is getting super important. So I think you have a really interesting approach, how you come up with ideas for short form, and also how you use short form to come up with long form. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So touching back a little bit on what you said, I want to rewind the clock a little bit and tell a story. When originally I was working on YouTube channels, I started to see a glimpse of certain parts people would resonate with in a long form video, and that's what they would attach to someone when they met that famous influencer in person. It was very interesting to see what they would say, because oftentimes they would say, wow, you're actually way nicer in person. And it was very interesting since I knew him and he was very nice, but that wasn't portrayed as the brand. Now, when I think about short form and long form, how they play together, short form, the way I see it starting, you're essentially like audience mapping. You're trying to see and figure out what would an audience be keen on listening to you on. Long form is going deep into depth with those topics. So what I like to always say is I think of short form as they like what you did. Long form, they like who you are. So just because I like something you did doesn't mean that I like you as a person. I just think that's very cool. And we see that a lot in short form. There was a channel that I was consulting with, and they had over 40 videos with at least over 10 million short form views. However, they would do long form videos and it would get 600 views. There's a channel that has around like 230K subs. He would go live every single day and it would get about like 1.3, 2K views on the live that he would stream every day. And it shows you that they may like that one talking point for the short form. And I would see how do we incorporate that nuance into the long form repeatedly so that we get that same audience and really see how do we portray all of that short form content where we did the proper audience mapping into the long form. That channel just didn't really figure it out for them.
Yeah, and what's cool about that is it's like a really holistic way of looking at it, right? Because it's not like that's what most people do. It's like, oh, short form content, I just want to come up with some polarizing, crazy stuff to go viral. But then if you don't have anything else of substance after it, like those views are worthless pretty much.
That channel, we were talking about doing a consulting deal, and through discovery calls, they didn't even make six figures. And it's a channel with 250K, 30K subs, has, I would say, like cracked a viral formula in the space for like the red pill type of space, but they still couldn't sell anything.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And in that way, you kind of, I guess you're also at that part where you see that everything is connected in marketing and content and ads, because if a short form content works really well as a organic content piece, you can use it as an ad by changing it a little bit. You can use that short form content to make a YouTube video and go a little bit more in depth. Those videos sometimes kind of become like a mini VSL that you can either use on your YouTube channel as a VSL, or pull away from YouTube and put it on a website and use it as a VSL. So it's all kind of connected. So I'm curious about like how you look at like organic versus ads, like in creating it, because for me it starts to be a little bit the same, right? Like you start a YouTube video with a hook and like building some curiosity, and that is also an ad that could send people to a VSL.
Correct.
But it could also be just the YouTube video, right? You do the hook and you start going into the YouTube video. So that's kind of like similar. Do you see differences when you are like consulting and helping people with like organic and ads where things don't translate well, or like where you maybe have to make some changes?
Yeah, of course. So back in the day, there was, when we were scaling one of the largest YouTube channels that I worked with, there was a very broken flywheel of what was happening on paid advertising versus what was happening on organic. And eventually me and the old media director, we pretty much every week sat down for an hour, and I would reveal everything that was happening on organic, and he would show me everything that was happening on Facebook paid. And we would strategize. I would show him retention graphs on YouTube and say, hey, this specific thing worked. Would it translate to ads? And then he would show me things from paid advertising that would work. And we would have that close collaboration. And that's actually where I see a lot of production teams have a missing flywheel, where if you are able to solve that bottleneck, the repetitions that you get exponentially increase, since paid and organic are now talking to each other and they're not fighting. To be clear, we fought to see how many sales we would get every single day. However, eventually you have to put money in, money out for ads, and then organic slowly compounded over time. So one of the key things that I look out for when I'm measuring ads versus organic and doing that type of thinking, one, I always like to use organic, since that is essentially half cold, half warm targeting. In YouTube, it has built-in retargeting. If you think about it, the algorithm is always searching for a video to put in front of an audience. That's built-in retargeting. That's what we do with the retargeting campaigns. But it's doing it for us all the time. For every video that we upload, it doesn't give up. It always puts your video in front of an audience. Yeah. The second piece to that is knowing that each video is retargeting. Then what I look at is, specifically, to get a little geeky, I'll look at browse and suggested in the back end of YouTube in order to see what is popping off more organic and feed that information to the ads team. Yeah. With the ads team, they're taking that, and usually, depending on the campaign, they may run view campaigns to just garner an audience to just retarget that, or they may just see that angle. I'll tell them and look at the back end on YouTube, look at the highs and lows of the retention and see where people drop off, and then give that to the ads team to ideate, oh, maybe that's a good hook. And that's also the same strategy that I would use for short form. If we're seeing things happening in long form retention, why not use that, since it's already proven by YouTube's back end to garner an audience?
Yeah, that's pretty cool, because you're learning essentially twice as fast, right? It's like, oh, I have a YouTube video. It's not like, oh, I learned something for the next YouTube video, but I also learned some stuff that I can put in shorts. Yeah. And the same with shorts or YouTube videos. Like, hey, I learned something, maybe we can make an ad. Instead of like only looking at ads, optimizing like in some kind of black box where you're only looking at your own stuff. Correct. So you can pretty much learn twice as fast. So I think that's pretty cool, but it is pretty hard, right? Because you have to like actually coordinate the team and communicate and understand the other person, and also not fight all the time, because that doesn't really work at some point.
For sure.
So that's pretty interesting. But I think that's like, if you really want to scale efficiently, then that works, because also that's what I see, and that's why I also onboarded you with one of my clients. If you run ads and you also have a good organic strategy, like your funnel will just convert better, right? Because you're nurturing them, because they've seen you before, or because they see a video and then book a call. So that's super important, of course. Now, I'm really big into VSLs right now, because I just think like nobody wants to read anything. Sales pages are dead. I mean, they're never dead, but I just focus on it because I think it has the most, it's the biggest mass market conversion mechanism there is right now, and it will probably stay that for 5, 10, 20, 50 years, because we always watched movies.
Correct.
Or before it was like storytelling, and now it's like we all watch movies or series.
Right. And even on that, the funny thing about movies is I actually hate the saying of our attention spans are shortening. If that was true, the whole movie industry would be quite screwed. If our attention span was 5 seconds, we walked in, we sat down, and then we immediately left the theater.
Yeah.
Really, what I encourage people to face the reality is that the attention market has just become more competitive. And really, you have to take a stern look at your content and realize that it's not that TikTok has influenced people to only think in 5 seconds, or we have attention spans less than a goldfish. It's you aren't competing enough with the attention of everything else, and taking a stern look at your content and really realizing what can you do to optimize around that. Sometimes that doesn't also mean cut every 5 seconds and do B-roll and then this and that. It could be the story that you're telling. It could also be the format. When people are about to consume content, where are they consuming it? What's that type of mindset for that person? If they're listening to a podcast, of course, YouTube right now also is pushing podcasts. So right now, if they're in that format and they're looking for a podcast, maybe it is they are going for a 2-hour drive. That was me on the way here. Shout out to All In Podcast. That's what I watch all the time when I'm going to drive somewhere. I would just watch the All In Podcast, and they get 100% retention just from that because of the setting.
Yeah, I want to go back there in a little bit, the whole
course.
retention thing, because I think that's super important for everybody that's listening or watching. But yeah, just think about it. Like, if you compare a movie now to 10 years back, guess what? There's more special effects. It looks better. It's higher quality. We even have 3D nowadays. And that's kind of what I always tell my clients. Like, you're literally competing with Hollywood. You're competing with Netflix, because they can watch your ad or your VSL, or they can watch Netflix. They can watch the YouTube video, or they can watch Netflix. So, you kind of have to like actually be interesting, have good content. That is a hard truth to swallow for most people. But let's go back to retention, right?
Sure.
So when I'm doing VSLs or ads, I also try to learn from people outside of just like people that are running ads or doing VSLs. That's why I think looking at movies, but also looking at YouTube is really interesting. So I know you have kind of like a framework that you use to hold people's attention in YouTube videos. So I'm curious what you see that's working right now, and maybe share a little bit about the framework you use to, in this TikTok era, to still hold their attention and actually, retain them. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. One of the things that I realized when I was working with one of the biggest influencers' YouTube channel is the power of storytelling and intentionality. I believe a lot of people in this space think that it's just as easy as turning on a camera. And what gets missed is there's kind of like that overnight 10-year success, and then you see them one day. A lot of that happens on YouTube as well. And some creators, you see it and immediately you think, oh, well, why can't I just do that? I could just do that same style. But there's a lot of nuances that end up happening.
Yeah.
For essentially what I find working in retention right now, I would say is really thinking about the story, that the underlying narrative that you're trying to tell throughout the video. What is going on truly in the audience's head? Like when we work on scripts with Max, let's say, I always have a question, why does the audience click this? Then I have a second question, why does the audience really click this? Right? And it's to get us to really think deeply about our assumptions on why we're making this video. I'll give you an example. I'm an anime and manga nerd, for sure. I read One Piece every single week for those watching. If you want to chat, DM me. I'm totally open to it. And there was a video, I was at our mastermind this weekend. I was showing a video that popped up on my newsfeed. And it was about some very niche reference. If I say it, no one's going to understand unless they read One Piece. And I said, I would click this because I'm interested in their theory. But why did I really click it? And why I really clicked it is because I am interested in continuing the adventure that I'm on reading this series for the past 15 years and how it lets me talk to my high school friends about this topic. That's actually why I really clicked. It's not because I was interested in the character. And I think that's what gets lost with a lot of people when they're ideating content. it's really having that through line of why and what am I saying to the audience, and being very intentional about everything in the video, quite frankly, and making best use of the attention that you have while they're on the video. For retention specifically, I would say always thinking about the hook, of course, so we're just gonna go through a simple framework, always thinking about the hook. What did the title and thumbnail do to then pay off the hook in the very beginning of the video? I critique the first 30 seconds of the video pretty hardcore. I also look at the channel average of average view duration. Depending, if you have videos that are an hour long and then you have videos that are 12 minutes, it's gonna skew because of that. So I would just pretty much think about those as series on a channel, because I think about a channel as like a TV network. It's like what series are on that channel on the television network. I would group those and look at the average view duration, and then I critique that plus adding on a minute. So we're always getting better. If I critique just that, we're always just going to get like a 14-minute average view duration. So what I end up doing for retention, especially in the beginning of the video and all throughout to have payoffs throughout the video, is what I call the quest framework. So we start with Q, which is a question. That's something that, you know, is interesting to the audience and really thinking about what kind of meta narrative is going on their head. Then you have U, which is a unique, that may be a unique thought to you, a unique statement, something that is kind of jarring to them in the very beginning and saying something maybe kind of completely different than what they would be expecting. Then you have E, which is equations. So that is more of statistical significance, like showing them data, 78% of blah, 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 blah. So that builds up credibility in the video very fast. Then you have S, which is story, and that's your personal story. It doesn't always also have to be a story that comes from your experience. And this is what I see a lot. A lot of people say, well, I don't really have that experience. And I'm like, hey, that's okay. Instead, think of story as something that you do and you put that person in the state of a story. Because you can make them into a character on a fictitious story, essentially.
Smart, yeah.
Then you have T, which is thought. That's like a quote. That's like a thought leader saying something that you're reacting to or you're essentially playing off of. So using the quest framework, that's how I essentially start thinking about the video, and all the points and segments within the video always start with a quest. I have a main quest, so that's one of the 5, and then you have a side quest which further entices them to keep watching so that you're hitting 2 out of the 5 every single time.
Yeah.
And all throughout, we're using open loops to keep people throughout the video. So open loops, don't get super cheesy with them all the time, because it will be really annoying if, let's say we're watching this podcast and every single time you or I make a point, it's like, well, later on in the video, we'll talk about, if you do that the whole time, it's going to get very annoying. Yeah. However, you could do things where you anchor them and then give a payoff to the next point, where it may be something in the beginning of the video where we say, hey, at the end, I'm going to give you one hack, but that only makes sense if you understand the first 3. Then it's like, okay, that kind of makes sense, right? In the sequence of events that you're about to teach me, there's a hack at the end that'll make it all make sense. That gets users to retain and watch the video longer. And that's what I would say. It's kind of like the retention hacks that I would use. It is more simple, and Max says, right, it's like the foundation is ultimately what I care the most about, and having the reps in foundation versus like any cool hacky techniques of like, oh, please subscribe, press the like button, things like that. It's like, I don't think I've ever heard press subscribe or click the like button and actually did it myself. It's probably more for a younger audience than anything else, or maybe super older.
Yeah, and also to go back to retention, right? If people don't continue watching your video or your next video, like, it doesn't even matter if they subscribe, because they can just as easily unsubscribe. If they don't like your stuff, correct, it's not going to get pushed by the algorithm.
And I would say that's actually one of the most interesting parts of YouTube. I don't know about you. For me personally, and people I tend to talk to, we actually are very selective about who we subscribe to.
Yeah.
YouTube is actually not a platform where we're subscribed to 2,000 channels. Like we are following TikTok or on Instagram, where we're just following people. It is a bit more personal to you.
Take too much time if you actually have to watch all those videos. So.
Yeah. So I would say that's the advantage that you also have, where the audience is very selective. So if you hit a nerve with them, there's no necessary reason to get them to subscribe.
Yeah.
And call out for that. Let that happen organically, because you've won their subscription. And what I always say to everyone doing YouTube is you're earning a distribution channel. And that tends to set expectations better in terms of timeline of also looking for results. When you're earning a distribution channel, that doesn't sound like a very easy thing that happens overnight.
Yeah.
But essentially, you're not owed an audience just because you create content. But
Yeah.
what you eventually get is a distribution channel that you can release a product and monetize yourself through that distribution channel that you now earned. And since it's earned through value over time, then we usually see the reaping rewards of that compounded.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's also like an issue in general that, we as marketers are always trying to make things sound a little bit easier and a little bit sexier than maybe they are sometimes. So if you're into service delivery like we are, you have to actually, go to the other side and be like, hey, it might take a little bit.
Correct. And that doesn't mean that we don't make money along the way either. Of course we do. It's just when you look at overall the compounding effects. I'll tell another quick story. So in the very beginning, when we were working on that YouTube channel, it was me versus the Facebook ads person. I mentioned it a little earlier. And every single day, we were required to put down how much money our traffic channel made. So I'm facing Facebook ads back in 2017-ish.
Super
okay,
cheap,
like
super
non-compliant. Like you could say
whatever.
The most wild claims, and FTC's not looking at you. No one's looking at you.
Yeah.
To be fair, you could do the same on YouTube. And when compliance started to get harder on Facebook, I was like, I could still make $100 a day and be fine.
There you go. Yeah.
Right? So every single day we would have to post on Slack the attribution of what came from the platform. I think I lost for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And it was like, I thought I was going to get fired, to be quite frank. I was like, I don't know why I'm around. I can't make any sales from YouTube. Then slowly it was one sale, and it was paid in full. And the sales team ended up commenting on like one of the meetings. The sales director at that time said, yeah, we just got like a lead from YouTube. I was like, what? Yes. And it wasn't a payment plan. I was like, yes.
It wasn't a payment plan.
And he said that was one of the easiest closes that he's ever done.
Yeah.
And he said the amount of indoctrination, the man came in and he already watched YouTube, that influencer's YouTube for 2 years. And he said, I'm already sold. Like, I just need to know how to pay because I couldn't find it on the website. And slowly over time, I started to beat Facebook ads. And then that's when we eventually had the link of, hey, what's working on organic, what's working on paid, and then having that flywheel. But I do want to put one disclaimer out there as well, because I think a lot of people can see that success of, oh yeah, you grew the channel to 1 million subscribers, did $15 million in the back end. Everything is an omnipresence flywheel. We were already running, $800 to $1.5 million in ads per month. So of course, some of the people who are curious about that influencer are going to go search on Google and find YouTube, since YouTube was pushing YouTube on Google search much more back then. And we had such an omnipresent channel where we were on Instagram back then. TikTok and stuff didn't exist, but we were on Instagram, YouTube. We were doing Twitter, like half-assed, to be honest. And then we were doing like blog posts and everything like that. And when you double click into that, just know that my advice when you're looking at other channels is you never know what's going on behind the scenes at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something we talked about a little bit before, and I literally had talked to a client today, and they were like, yeah, our YouTube started growing. I'm like, yeah, we're running YouTube ads, So there's always like this, I would say almost like invisible channel growth sometimes. And I think we talked about it 2 days ago, right? Where you saw some guy blowing up, right? And then you were looking up that guy and it's like, oh, damn, he had a bunch of Twitter followers. Correct. So he actually blew up on Twitter, used that as leverage to grow his YouTube channel. And there's a lot of like invisible growth happening, like where they are cross promoting their other channels, where you don't really see it. So that's like, and then you're like, oh, this guy, he just blew up in the last 3 months. I'm gonna
copy him. Let's do the titles and thumbnails just like
hooks.
him.
Exactly. Copy everything. Well, and that doesn't really work then.
Correct.
Now, we can talk about the invisible stuff for a long time, but you have to pretty much look it up and actually get it. But what I think is interesting is like the notion of like copying other people's YouTube channels and videos, because most time it doesn't work. And I want to go into a little bit more here and actually use Sam Sulek as an example. Because nowadays everybody's like, I want to be more authentic. I'm just going to film myself and with the camera.
Correct.
Wes Watson, he says he's still filming everything on his iPhone. He blew up. So people see other people do that. but then they copy it and it doesn't work for them. Sometimes, disclaimer here, we're not like,
Correct.
we're just overgeneralizing everything. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. What do you think about, like, first of all, like people copying other people's YouTube channels? And if they want to copy someone properly, like, and actually get results, what do they need to do?
Yeah.
Like, what do you have to look at?
Yeah, so let's tackle that. The first part of this is tackling a lot of the copy and paste in the space. There's a lot of things and nuances that person has built up over time that gets lost just looking on the surface. Let's take Sam Sulek, for example. Sam, of course, there's a wave of authenticity. I also would say that Alex Hormozi had this when he was starting to blow up as well, where he was just sitting in the closet. Yeah. And those are my favorite videos still. I know, I understand why the production needs to get higher since I've done the same thing. However, it's still, when I had grown the YouTube channel in its early days, it was this influencer just speaking on stage. It wasn't fancy editing or anything like that yet. And with Sam, we have to realize that it's not that he's necessarily an underdog, but people are rooting for him for something because he wants to go into competition. He also looks a certain way, which is part of brand, to be fair. Yeah. And his style of content appeals to a certain audience that was not necessarily being tapped into in the space. When you get into the copying game, what ends up happening is we see let's see agency owners, because that's what we're starting to see. I'll call them out a little bit. For agency owners, I want to be raw and authentic because I saw this video blow up. Then you have the next one. I want to be raw and authentic. And then now everybody is raw and authentic. And now you are just in the wave and you've built your audience in a way where they expect that from you, but now everybody else does it. So now everybody went to blue ocean. Now it's becoming more red ocean. Yeah. I would always encourage people, just do what you want to do and what is consistent for you, that doesn't burn you out, doesn't make it so that you're putting up a false sense of yourself. To me, that's the ultimate game, is really keening in on not necessarily being a copycat. It doesn't mean that we don't take inspiration, which is a big difference. Inspiration is how did they do that thing and what does it look like for me? Not how did they do that? Okay, let me copy it. That's a big difference. Yeah. A lot of the times also when the advantage that you have on YouTube, like we were talking a little bit about how the heck has built-in retargeting. That makes it very easy to see what the audience is looking for in terms of content. Mm-hmm. So typically what I do is I advise everyone to make essentially like a dummy YouTube account. So just go and make a new YouTube account and follow a few people, subscribe to them, like their videos, comment on them, and the algorithm will start to serve you videos that it thinks are good. Don't search on this channel because that'll skew the algorithm. You want it to be pure suggestions since that's the best algorithm on YouTube to get views essentially. Unless you're a search channel, then it's a little different. Yeah. From there, I would look at what are some of the through lines in the content, the title, the thumbnails, the hooks, and write those type of things down and see what it means for you. So one of the partners that I work with on YouTube, you know, right now, as time of this filming, there's the wave of people like doing the raw authentic videos and then like drawing on a whiteboard like Sam Umpins did like years ago. And not to call anyone out, I think they're great videos. I've watched the videos all 100%. And one of the ways that we were differentiating and talking about the partner was, well, what if you instead did like not a whiteboard, you did a blackboard and like you had neon colors, and those neon colors, the animation style for you would be, it takes off the framework that's essentially being laid out can like be lifted off the blackboard and like displayed visually, right? Like nice. that would be more unique. And now that's a style that's very hard to copy and you're known for that. Yeah. Or it's an Easter egg. So what we identified for him was with the blackboard, sometimes he would just have it in the background and it would say something very funny. Or like show like $1 million funnel, but he's talking about cold emails. And it's like, why don't you talk about the $1 million funnel that's behind you? Right? Finding those little uniques and building up that brand is lost when you just go to copy, because do not fundamentally understand why they're doing the things they're doing, and it seems nonchalant. It seems like, oh, they just flipped on a camera, it's just like filming in the car, it's just this and this. But that's what the audience that they cultivated, once again, it's an earned distribution. That's what they earn from the audience to expect.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like, that's a great way of looking at making things unique. And just go back there a little bit, right? Sam, for example, is super funny.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, you cannot be him, like, unless you're super funny.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to work because he's super funny.
Correct.
Right? And if you look at, like, what you mentioned, Sam Ovens, like, he had those super chill videos, but like his content, he was literally the first guy, in my opinion, that was really bundling self-help advice for entrepreneurs on a super high level.
Correct.
So everything he was saying, like, it was, every sentence on its own was a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, that sounds good. Like, your brain exploded with every new sentence that he said. It was like, oh, I never thought about that, right? So he was unique in his communication and his scripting already. So, I mean, that's the question I always ask myself. It's like, also, like, what would have happened if he would have used edits, right? Or like with Sam, what would have, I mean, now I don't think Sam is going to start doing a bunch of edits because it's working, but it's also an interesting question to ask yourself, because if you want to be more authentic, maybe you should actually still use the edits, right? You don't really know until you try.
Correct.
So, but yeah, the main point there is, like, if you copy someone, like, and if you're not funny and they are funny, it's probably not going to work unless you have something else that's kind of like giving you that unfair.
Correct. And I would question everyone who's thinking about that type of authenticity. Is it really the camera that is the authenticity, or is it the story and the topic that you're talking about? Since I watched some of those videos, I question, I'm like, you would never talk about this in a regular video. So is it the authenticity that you lowered all production quality and threw it out the window? Or is it because you did that, now you told a different story versus trying to prop yourself up, do a certain thing? To me, it is more of the former. I believe that you are telling a different story now because of the way you're trying to portray yourself. And that's the thing that works. That's the thing that is authentic to people, that you can still do with the edits. Yeah. You could still do with fancy production. You could do it with low budget production, but essentially it's that foundation that goes unrealized of how good of a storyteller are you? Do you have captivating camera charisma? Are you able to build a sense of community within that, right? And that could be like phrases you use to build that community, the engagement that you use. It could be tonality. All these skills end up building up, and that's what gets portrayed, but then lost when it's copied or just simply referenced as, hey, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Let's dive in a little bit more into the whole authenticity thing, because one thing that I see, not just with organic, but also even with ads and with like general marketing, is that when people are trying to be authentic, they start talking about what they care about, what they are like struggling with, or what they just overcame, without really looking at what the audience wants, right?
Correct.
So then, out of nowhere, I've seen this with agency guys, they start talking about super complicated concepts, or they start talking about super basic stuff. It's like, hey, you want to attract people that make at least 100K a month, but then you're talking about how to start your business from scratch, right? It goes both ways. They're like super like, oh, I want to do the Andrew Tate hype style stuff, while their audience is like higher up in the sophistication ladder or awareness ladder, or they go super, crazy, like, yeah, this is how I manage my team for 20 people. And it's like, bro, it's like that guy's literally like his own media bar, his own creative director and everything himself, and he got to 30, 50K a month, and you're going to help him. So how do you look at it? So I will tell you a little bit how I look at it. It's like, you still look at the audience, right? And at the data, what do they actually want? And within that idea or concept that your audience wants, you use your own story, or you give your authentic opinion. But how do you look at like balancing being authentic with like actually producing what the audience wants, and also what is going to get you sales at some point?
So I think the last thing that you said is the most important. And it's not that it's getting you sales, it's what's the intention of the channel in the long term. What essentially are you building all of this for? Is it to monetize? Is it to, just build a community? Is it to just have fans and be recognized in public, to be honest?
Yeah.
Fair. What is essentially that north compass for the channel? That's where I always start. Like, what are we actually in this for? I'll tell a funny story too about the why people create channels, right? So in the very beginning, we had created the channel and just offered value. Eventually, we started to monetize it, and we just delayed the ask. And then we saw the rewards of just producing a whole bunch of value out into the marketplace.
Yep.
There was another entrepreneur that I was working with, and his channel, he was providing the same value. Did a very successful launch a couple of years ago and wanted to do the same thing. However, this entrepreneur started to make a bit of money, let's say. I started to get above the $1 million, $2 million a month mark.
Yeah.
And the longest time he cultivated this audience, he was saying, and not trying to be very political, just using the words, he was like, I'm a servant to God. My dream car is this, that, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And he went and bought a Lambo. And
Classic.
every single comment, I wouldn't say every single comment, 80% of the comments were, wait, I kid you not, the first most liked comment was someone going back to an old video and time stamping what his actual dream car was, because it wasn't the Lambo. And he betrayed the audience in my eyes.
Yeah.
And he lost a lot of credibility in the space. 80% of the comments on that video were, this wasn't your dream car. You should give back, think about like the kingdom of God, things like that and everything, since he set himself up to be more philanthropic, but there weren't any philanthropic maneuvers on the channel being shown. And instead it was, I just bought a Lambo. Hey, if you want to do this, click the link below, this, blah, 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 blah. And it all became money focused.
Yeah.
And that was a betrayal of the audience.
Yeah.
And I say that to demonstrate, if he was in the channel just to make money, I would have steered him away from saying those things in the first place. But it was a good leverage point to build an audience and community. But if you're not in line and really knowing why that audience is there and what you're building towards, you're like, in essence, you will be betrayed by the audience as well. Because what did you do to the earned distribution channel? You said, hey, I'm going to distribute to you videos about my philanthropic work through like the message of God, essentially.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was the distribution, the earned distribution, what did they get back? Videos about me buying a Lambo.
Yeah.
So what happens to the earned distribution? It goes away, since that's not what they were expecting.
Yeah.
Going back into the spectrum of authenticity in the videos, when you know why your channel exists in the first place, I would then ask yourself, what do you essentially want to be known as, and think about the brand.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are just putting out videos there and they're not growing and things like that. One of the best things that I always like to tell people is, if a comedian was to parody you, or if somebody were to make fun of you, what would they say? How would they dress? Are they in a certain setting? Do they speak a certain way? That builds up brand.
Yeah.
And a lot of little nuances of things in videos, and this is compounded over time. This isn't an on-off switch. It's just a whole bunch of repetitions of things over and over and over to build a brand. It's those little decisions over time that end up eventually having you make that earned distribution channel and be known for something like that. Now, when it comes to the authenticity within that, to me, how I always view it is, going back once again to why the channel is made, I keep always honing back to that, since that is the lens at which you see and say to the audience what the expectation is. So the reason that I encourage more soft selling than hard selling on YouTube, and providing just an abundance in value. Since essentially on YouTube, yeah, of course you're there to be entertained, but I would say we're usually looking up education for the most part. And at least in our niche, we're mostly looking up education. So if the intentionality is to educate them and give them all of the what, because essentially you're selling them the how, that's how I would think about the authenticity. You don't hold anything back, because that's actually not where your money is made, unless it is. And we see this all the time. Someone will make 10K a month, and then they're teaching people how to make 10K a month. And then now they make 100K a month, and they're like, yes, it's like, that isn't how you made the money.
Yeah.
Right? It's you're more in the infopreneur space than the owner space, essentially.
Yeah.
With that spectrum, I always keep going back to, if you're questioning the authenticity, you most likely, and this is just anecdotal evidence, this is how I see people, you may be putting on a front that isn't necessarily true. And you need to get deep with yourself and ask yourself why. Like, where does this actually come from? Why do I actually do this?
I mean, that's a pretty deep question, right? When you look at it, it's most of the time guys who make 10K a month. Like, I didn't do it. I have clients who teach other people how to make an agency, and while my agency is doing more. But that's what I see a lot, right? So that's actually interesting. That's kind of like, you know, how Alex always says, like, it's all about the offer, but it's also all about your business and what kind of person you are, right? Because making all those videos, it kind of exposes you. So if you make 10K a month with your agency, you start teaching other people how to make 10K a month, and you lose all your clients because you're too busy with your coaching business. You probably don't feel good about teaching others anymore. I've heard stories of like drop shippers who at some point were like borrowing money to run ads to run a coaching business because dropshipping didn't work anymore, or they could not make dropshipping work.
But they're teaching dropshipping.
Yes, yeah, it's like they start dropshipping again. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, let me run ads to sell my coaching offer to make money. So, yeah, of course, then it's not coming from the right place, and at some point you will feel that. And I think with ads you can kind of get away with it, but on a YouTube channel where you're like actually, you know, sharing info, people will just notice. But I think that's actually a nice transition to a little bit more dark question. It's like, how do you not kill your YouTube channel in the long term? The more positive way of asking this, of course, is like, you know, how do you keep innovating and keep growing? I mean, and sometimes of course, the growth will stop a little bit because of the algorithm. But let's focus first on the dark side. Like, how do you not kill or fuck up your YouTube channel? Like, what are the things you should definitely not do that you have seen others do?
Of course. I would say the first one is a bit of a more heated debate on those who run YouTube ads. I would never run paid advertising on an organic channel whatsoever. Just would exit out. I can give you YouTube experts that I learned from that would tell you the same thing. Someone in our space is growing their YouTube channel, and they did a conference talk, and I clipped where he was talking about the day. And by the way, I think it's clear. It's better I clarify why my stance on this is so strong. When I was running the channel back in the day, we were trying YouTube ads, of course, right? We were doing Facebook ads, we were doing Google ads. Yeah. And it's like, why not YouTube? YouTube's already doing this organic. Like, why don't we put fuel to the fire here?
Yeah.
What ended up happening was the day that YouTube ad traffic eclipsed organic and it went above organic, the channel went to tumble down in views. I probably say this, I thought I was going to get fired again, part 2. And it just tumbled. It tumbled. We were having around 450,000 concurrent viewers every like 48 hours.
Yeah.
And it went all the way down to about 80,000. And I was like, the channel's gone. It took me and the creator, it took 3-4 months to get it back to 3/4 of what it ever was.
Yeah.
And I said, that's it. Ads are banned on the channel. That same day, I deleted all the ads from the channel. We lost all the data because I didn't care. I went super down the rabbit hole. I was like, nope, this is all getting deleted. We made a secondary channel. So I'll give everyone the alternative. What I believe you all should do is make a secondary channel where you upload the best videos, because you're not going to content claim yourself. Upload the best videos, upload testimonials there, and just name it the same. And what you can do is, with the organic channel, you could actually lend that audience to the YouTube ads team, and you get the same benefit without destroying the channel. So what's the real argument? That someone watches an ad and they click your profile to watch your channel? I personally have never seen a user behavior where they get an ad interrupting what they are watching and saying, this is very curious, let me go to this guy's YouTube channel, let me go to this gal's YouTube channel. That has never been the use case. I fundamentally do not see a lot of people clicking into it. And just in case they do, that's why we upload the videos, that's why we upload the testimonials. And when we did it, we had a channel with over, I think, about 800 testimonials on that one channel. So it was just social proof of over 800 people talking about the program that people would see if they were, for whatever reason, happening to click on the profile to watch the profile instead of their video and watch the YouTube ad.
Yeah.
I would say that is one of the biggest things that I see. That is definitely more on the advertising. I would say going into the content a bit more and double clicking into this, not being focused enough with what the audience expectations are on why they are watching you. Why are they actually bought in? It's like we mentioned earlier, why do they click? Like, why do they care? Why do they really care? And being very in tune. Now, I'm going to make one big disclaimer. There are a lot of times where we did things and it didn't work out at all. And that happens quite frequently. Like, there was this super crazy interactive series that we did, and it was like, it's essentially a sales call, but on YouTube. And you have an A and a B option. And you go down the path. We filmed about over 90 videos, and it's like all this mastermind with a whole bunch of things.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It made some revenue, but it definitely didn't go viral for the amount of work we put in. You'll always do those tests, and it's okay to have those not go well. And then on the counter side, when videos do go well, truly think about doubling down on that and analyzing, like, what was the real audience expectation? When a video doesn't go well, and YouTube has this UI where they show you like rankings, like 1 out of 10, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I actually love the 10 out of 10s because that is where I get the most learning. When it's the 1 out of 10s, it just reinforces behavior. That isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't really give us a lot of clues to what didn't go well. Yeah. Since I've seen 1 out of 10 videos and we've replicated and it became 10 out of 10. So it allows you to double click into it and go a little further. The other thing that I would say that destroys channel, we spoke about it a little earlier, was really keeping in mind that you have a reputation with your audience. Once again, that's being earned. And when you betray that earned respect that the audience has with you, they will move somewhere else.
Yeah.
And to me, when you think back to why did you create this channel in the first place, that is what you have to be very clear on, since that is the respect that you're earning with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, to give a little example that I've seen in real life, and again, this is not like to judge that person, but just for the experience. It was a guy who was making content about being a good Christian and praying and how God found him and all that kind of stuff. But then he started an OnlyFans agency, right? And it's like, again, like, if you want to make money like that, I don't judge. But if you start, like, if even if your followers figure it out in some way, it's this huge disconnect where it's like, probably 80 or 90 or 95% of the Christians don't think it's proper, to start an OnlyFans agency. And I guess that's the same with the car example that you mentioned. If you're always about being humble and then you start driving crazy cars, or if you're literally lying about stuff and turns out, also that's the problem with lying. At some point you'll probably like mess up and people will see it. Then then it's where you really look at the audience. So even if you want to be your authentic self and talk about your OnlyFans agency on your Christian channel, probably don't do it. Or do you think that could still work?
So I would say when you're on YouTube, I believe, as much as we like to believe we can remove our ego from the situations, you do sign up to be on a world stage. And really seeing the implications of that. And of course, it's like, all right, like, you always have the haters and the trolls and things like that. But essentially, you have to think about it. On a 2-year time horizon, imagine and ask yourself, am I okay not growing the same way that I most likely have an expectation of, or see other people in the space growing?
Yeah.
And that will be every time you go to film, every time you think about a video, every time you watch YouTube, right? See, why did that guy get it? I know. That's what you're essentially signing up for. When you're asking decisions on what to do on the YouTube channel, I always go back to the brand and the reputation. Not reputation in terms of you need to look good, reputation with the audience and reputation with yourself. It's kind of like people who have low self-confidence in a way. The way to build that back up, as it's been taught to me, is just micro promises with yourself. Keep those over time and you'll most likely be confident since you're able to keep your word. You break that, then you start to become less confident. That's what I would think about with the channel, where if someone is making these promises, doing these things, and it's not in tune with their character, they will also self-implode. And I've seen it. I've seen channels that they're doing really crazy production, things like that, and it's just not sustainable for them. And to me, I prefer sustainability versus consistency. I want that, since that we have to work on this together for 2 to 5 years to earn a distribution channel.
Yeah.
Do we really think we're going to get there? And we could get there faster by doing the non-conventional things, but over time, it just doesn't work. So I'll give you an example as well. One of the partners I work with doesn't do very well, like ad-lib. He wants a teleprompter all the time. The issue is you can tell that he reads from a teleprompter, right? It's just like his eyes are moving, things like that.
Yeah.
And what I had said to him was, I would prefer you don't use a teleprompter, and instead just think about it as you were getting asked a question. Since you do weekly coaching calls with your clients, if you were to get asked a question, you don't need a teleprompter. So why is it any different, right? But there were still mental blocks, and we're working through having those mental blocks solved. And then overall, then you need to learn a different skill. And it's identifying those things where if he can bring his best self with the teleprompter, it's not that teleprompters are bad or they're good. It's how do we unlock that authenticity from him and the relationship that he has, the reputation that he has with the audience on where it's best performed. Since one of the things that were said on one of his group coaching calls was, you seem different like on YouTube versus on Zoom. It's like, I wonder why that is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because your content is scripted by not you, someone else, but on Zoom, you're yourself because you don't have a teleprompter. It's like, think about that relationship. They bought into, like your own clients bought into you in Zoom versus on YouTube. It's like identifying those things overall. And one helpful tip I'll give everyone as well is when you're considering the YouTube channel and like what type of authenticity and things like that you're factoring in, I personally listen to sales calls, and I actually want to hear what the prospects are saying. And it's very similar to running ads, believe it or not. I'm looking to see what the audience is really saying. What are they saying is the most valuable about what is being offered? What are their blockers? Since we can create content to, one, aid the sales team too, because they could just send them a link to a video.
Yeah.
But two, at a mass scale, that's what you're doing. To me, that's the leverage that YouTube has, is that you're influencing that on a mass scale. So when you're thinking about, should I do the OnlyFans thing on my channel? It's like, factor all of these things in. It's not necessarily an easy decision, not to get analysis paralysis, but really my biggest focus is the brand. And what does this ultimately do on a 10-year time horizon for the brand?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a pretty long, deep answer. And now we talked about something practical, which is not unimportant. What is your opinion on using a teleprompter for YouTube videos specifically?
Of course.
I mean, you have been behind the scenes of a lot of big guys. So there's guys who use it. There's guys who don't use it. So how to decide?
So we're using a teleprompter right now. No, I'm just kidding.
We're using notes. They are there. That's why I'm like...
It's fair.
There's no girls walking past here in case my girlfriend's watching this. It's just I'm looking at the notes.
Right. I would say there is no right or wrong. I have no preference. My preference is, how do you appear on camera? Ultimately, that is the skill that needs to be trained. So Max, for example, not to Adam, he uses a teleprompter. You would never believe that he uses a teleprompter. He's actually very good. And when I questioned him on it on a call, he said, I've been practicing not looking like I'm reading from a teleprompter for 4 years. But the reason why he does it is because he wants to make sure that the hook of the video and what really needs to be said well is done well. And it comes from a point of course, that's being a great marketer, but essentially when you double click into why he does everything he does is to ultimately help people. And it sounds very like, okay, everyone says that, but imagine someone's training for 4 years to read a teleprompter properly just to get you to potentially watch this video to alter the course of your life forever.
Yeah.
That's a different level of depth when you're using a teleprompter versus a lot of people use it as a way to crutch themselves, essentially, to just say, hey, like you can speak about the topic. The other issue that I run into with teleprompter is you then have to script out the video, and it just depends. When I was working with the influencer that I was, we would give them a little bit of the hook, kind of like roughly where we want the direction to be. We would give them about 3 or 4 bullets. Now, if it was an ad, yes, of course, it's a little bit more in depth. Some YouTube videos called for certain things. Remember, in the Quest framework, if we were using statistics, there's something that needs to be specifically said, then fine.
Yeah.
But other times he would just look at the 3 bullet points, and because he can go in depth, he can just talk about it in depth, right? Now, my caution for using a teleprompter is, what if you do not have it and you need to film? What if you get invited to a podcast? Am I going to have a screen right behind you and then just look at the screen? No, I would encourage everyone to build up the skill and have the depth to talk about it. Not necessarily find the passion. It's talk about things that you don't need a teleprompter for. You don't need that to be scripted, because you could go in depth. You know, kind of in a way, you know what the hell you're talking about in a way, right? You have the expertise, because that is also where you find the authenticity. There's certain stories, certain phrases that you'll use that would never be telepromptered by a ghostwriter or copywriter, scriptwriter, unless you're reviewing it and then, you're having that collaboration. But my preferred preference is no teleprompter, just a few bullets, and then we're good to go.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. For ads, I'm always like 100% teleprompter.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you're mentioning it, that you're like, you don't really have like a preference whether people should use it, or actually are leaning towards not using a teleprompter, right? Because I just feel that it's getting so competitive, at least in like the info space, where if you are not on point, right, that you lose people's attention. And if you would like write a script and check it 5 times, like it's not really, you're probably going to do better with like your presentation than if you would just freestyle in a moment.
Correct.
Unless you have that talent where you're just so sharp that you're like half a second, boom, you see the structure and you do it. Now, and there's another side to this, or somewhere else where you can see this. Like if you read someone's book, they really put a lot of thought in it, right? And then you check someone's course and you're like, what the heck is this, right? Like there's a lot of course out there where the freaking YouTube video is better than the course. So then you see that, like, I guess it's also about how well you script it and how serious you take this kind of stuff and how good you are with like structures and just coming up with it on the spot. Because if you say the same thing 100 times over and over and over again, of course you know what to say, right? But if you don't, it's a little bit tricky. Where there are introvert entrepreneurs who are just behind the computer, not doing, anything related to talking. And then I like the teleprompter a lot, but I also feel your like feeling with like, then it's easier to be authentic, right?
Correct.
It's easier to look like a normal human being because it's hard to script jokes, right? Like these jokes,
correct,
they kind of came up. Although they might be bad jokes, but I would
of course, you definitely have to put in the reps of reading the script, even if it's going to go on a teleprompter, since there's certain tonalities, there's certain jokes. It's just the way that you're speaking or emphasizing certain points. So I know, if you're using a teleprompter, if you got to go on a rant, like I see like in brackets, just rant. It's like, cool, just do that, right? And it's more of a support mechanism versus a crutch. And I would always lean on not using it as a crutch. And like, what are you doing actively to remove that being a crutch from you? It's this very interesting, when I wasn't like consulting for YouTube, one of my favorite channels back in the day would take very famous videographers and photographers, and they would give them the most shittiest cameras ever. I'm not talking about, iPhones are really good now. They would give you like this Target Barbie with a camera type of thing that costs like $13. And they would give it to the pros and say, okay, make something out of it. And they were able to. They were able to string along the story. You could only imagine what would happen if they had all the high fidelity stuff. It's because that inner foundation was already built. And I see the same exact thing with teleprompter. If you become more in-depth with your points, are able to speak, are able to even get speaking coaches, like one of my partners has. He has a speaking coach just to look at the videos and give him feedback on what he could change. Another quick side story, every single video that we used to release on that influencer's channel, we would watch and pick out one thing. And it sounds cheesy, like, improve one thing every video. We would pick out one thing to fix, and he's also looking at his performance every single time. and saying, I could have pronounced this one a little better. Oh, this point actually got very confusing. And he's able to do that enough times where if it was a teleprompter, I don't think we would have had that same thing because he's not training the right skill. He's training the skill of reading from a teleprompter versus just speaking. So when he would go on stage to speak, now imagine that scenario.
Yeah.
Right? Now, you don't have a teleprompter. You go on a podcast, you don't have a teleprompter. It's like, I would rather use a teleprompter in the beginning if you really need it because I don't want to stop progress. And that's also very important. However, every once in a while, maybe just use 2 bullet points for that part of the script and stop the teleprompter and just see how you perform.
Yeah, I guess also the conclusion of this part of the conversation is that it really depends on if you want to speak on stage anyways, probably better to learn how to speak and then you can use that on YouTube as well.
Correct.
Or anywhere. But some people also have less time but then I guess you're also just gonna have to accept that this is like a full-time job almost, like being an influencer, being a video celebrity / camera tiger, doing these videos. So if you don't really want to commit to the craft, then you're not gonna get the best results. And that's kind of where I feel like the teleprompter might come in handy to still get results, right? Correct. Because it's kind of like if you're running ads and people are looking you up on YouTube and there's nothing there, it's also pretty bad. So you kind of have to do those YouTube videos. And I have to admit, some of my clients, they record a script and I'm like, okay, please work. You know what I mean? Yeah. But, and it's still like, if the script is good, if the copy is good, it almost beats everything.
Correct.
But
what essentially you tapped into there was the audience expectation, that you were able to nail it with the audience.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times people, of course, the audience is looking for what they're looking for. I personally feel when it's very, very scripted, it just comes off a different way than if we were just having a conversation. And not my biggest fear for everyone, it's imagine the disparity that you have when I watched you for 2 years on YouTube and I meet you for the first time and it's a completely different person. Like Alex Hormozi says, that's the impression that they're most likely will stay with them for the rest of their life. And I would rather that impression be the same all across the board, across all social media channels, so that is like the authenticity. That is the brand.
Yeah.
That is you, regardless of whether it's offline or online.
Yeah. All right. I think we are almost at an hour, so that's great. Yeah. Where can people find you on social media? Are you even still taking on clients, or are we going to do like a disclaimer here, like don't
disclaimer, apply? If you're very interested in growing the YouTube channel, earning a distribution channel, and are really looking to grow a brand, right? This isn't a situation where I want 1 million subs in like 10 months. It's like, that's not where we're going.
Yeah.
I want people who are very serious about building brand in the next 2 to 5 years and really committed to doing what it takes to build an all-star brand.
Yeah.
So that we have the results that we do together, and really taking a fine look at, do they essentially want to build that type of media within their business? So if that sounds interesting to anyone, I would DM me on Instagram. I'm at Gabe Saga, so GABE. We could put it probably visually on the screen or in the description. And let's just get in touch, and then we'll see. I qualify super hard because running a YouTube channel is not the easiest thing in the world. So no market. We're all marketers. I'm not trying to do any marketing scarcity. It's like truly probably only 1 or 2 more people, and then I most likely will max out, only because I'm not hiring people to offload the work from. Like, you're getting me working on the channel itself.
Yeah, it kind of becomes a pitch. I will add some more scarcity in here because I don't actually want people to sign up with Gabe so that he has more focus on the things that we are working on. But this is really not like some 3-month coaching program where you just get a quick fix. Yep. So you need to actually make money and have a long-term vision. And the last thing, and that's also why I thought it's interesting that you mentioned it, it is like we have talked about a lot of stuff. Like YouTube is complicated. There's a bunch of numbers to look at. And I know most guys, or girls or teams, they don't even look at the freaking numbers. Yep. They have no clue what they're doing. Just, come up with a random idea and just produce it. And there's this whole science to improving the videos, right? Even changing thumbnails from videos 7 months back, all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for someone, to just make sure that they have enough time and that they go this deep, because you're not doing that, is not working. And we have tried that with clients before. I didn't really go anywhere. Luckily, we're running ads, so we're still growing a little bit, but not on the channel, of course. That's
Hope
it.
not.
All right, thanks for having me. It was a
Perfect.
great one.
Thank you.